Hi, this is Corey McCray, the senator for the 45th Legislative District, and you're listening to the Conduit Street Podcast, my go-to source for the latest news and insight on state and local government in Maryland.
Hello and welcome to the Conduit Street Podcast. Kevin Kinnally here with Michael Sanderson. Michael, we are on Conduit Street. How many weeks now have we been saying, oh, I wish we were back on Conduit Street? Well, we're back.
Here we are. Back in the glorious studios, here at Conduit Street Central, and we got the whole engineering staff is here. That would be just you, right?
Just me, yeah. Unfortunately, we're working on that. We're working on that. If anybody knows anybody that's willing to do it for free, we would certainly appreciate that. But it is really good to be back. And first of all, I think, Michael, we're going to get into a lot of things today. We're going to talk about what's going on in Annapolis, which is what we always do. It's session. What's happening with the Senate versus the House, and we're on some different pages now. We're going to talk about the Accountability Implementation Board. That goes back to the blueprint. We talked a lot about the blueprint and Kerwin, but I think the most pressing issue for all of our listeners is the great cereal debate, the cereal drama that you dropped on everybody last week. We did a poll.
Right.
Tell everybody what's going on.
All right. So if you weren't with us last week, I had a weird moment. I'm putting my son to bed. We're recording from home late at night, and so I'm just on the heels of having getting my son down to bed, and his nighttime snack was a bowl of cereal.
Right. And
he asks me, is it okay with me if we just pour the milk first and then the cereal on top of that? So I end up with just it's a sea change. Like, what happened? Who is this kid? I thought things were going well.
Right.
My 9-year-old son suddenly has these perverse ideas that don't fit in our family.
Right.
So anyway, I'm happy to report that this was just a blip. And things have calmed down. We have since had cereal together.
Okay.
And in an appropriately fatherly way, I poured our bowls of cereal in the correct, universally understood to be correct fashion.
Setting a good example.
Yes.
Right.
And then this is how we do it. And I think we probably won't speak of this again. So that's okay. I mean, I feel good about it.
But we did run a poll, right? That also, I think, helps cement you feeling good about this. We ran a poll on the podcast Twitter account, and
right. So our friend Victoria, doing comms for MACo, thought that this was a topic that we might need to hear from people on, and I was worried that if we run this out to the general population, what if it comes back 50-50 or even like 70-30?
Yeah, even 20% of people. Yeah.
I would be really worried if our listeners or the people who follow our social media are milk first people. I would have to do some soul searching. I don't want to think about the place I'd have to go.
No, it wouldn't be good. But it turns out that everyone agreed that they're doing cereal first. Right. No one's doing milk first. So this was a blip, and I'm really happy that you're calmed down because it was a lot.
Sound and fury signifying nothing. So that's good. That's what we want.
Okay, so we can put that to bed. It sounds like that's good. No issues there. So Michael, let's get into Annapolis and what's going on. We are well into session now. It's February 17th. Everything is just a flurry of activity in both the House and the Senate. The big news that we talked about last week has happened. The Senate is back in person, and the House remains virtual. So some complications there, I think, just with logistics. But you've been back in the House and the Senate building. What is your take so far on how it feels to be back in both of the buildings? And then the Senate actually doing hearings in person, that's a big change too.
Yeah, so I haven't yet been at the table in person in the Senate. But I have been in both buildings now. So there's an office building for each of the Senate and the House. That's where they conduct their committee hearings, and then each member has an office with staff and so forth. And I wouldn't say, those buildings were effectively closed last year. I think there was a very limited circumstance where stakeholders like us could get in the building for a specific appointment. Someone had to walk you up, right? It was something like that.
Right.
I didn't do it a single time. I didn't end up as a single meeting. So it just wasn't a thing. And I know that part of the value is there are so many other stakeholders around for hearings and around talking to members that it's just a closed environment where you run into people almost randomly. There's some sort of like legislative Brownian motion thing where we just bang into each other and then suddenly, hey, wait, I needed to talk to you about this thing. And a lot of stuff gets done informally like that. I felt that starting to come back just walking around the two buildings. Now, what about you? You've been in both buildings, but you've been at the witness stand in the Senate. How's that feeling?
It was good. I think I said I was nervous, but I thought it was great. And it was like riding a bike. You said it would be, right? I think everybody was trying to get back into the groove. I did talk to some senators and I said, how has it been so far? And their comments generally are, it feels like it takes forever now that we're back in person. Like virtual seems like it went faster and we could move, but being back seems like it takes a lot longer. And yesterday, it was a long day in the Budget and Taxation Committee. So that's true.
Yeah, you call the name of a witness and that person has to walk up from the fifth row of the seats and like come in and sit down and can you pull the microphone a little? Like, I mean, we've seen this 1,000 times.
It all adds up. Those seconds add up, right? They just do. So instead of just being able to also sitting at a desk and being able to work and then just pressing your button and testifying, there are some benefits to that. The Wi-Fi over there, it is what it is. So it's good. It's interesting. But Michael, one of the reasons why you were back in the House and Senate office buildings today is because we were handing out awards that we weren't able to hand out to delegates and senators in person at our winter conference because the General Assembly was in a special session. So talk a little bit about these legislative awards and what they mean and what we did today. We finally got to hand it to them, get the picture, put it on social media. What's all that about?
Right, what I think lots of stakeholder groups and organizations, associations do this sort of thing. They have a vote for the legislator of the year or champion of the year or that sort of thing. We don't use that grandiose term, but we do a recognition award every year, and we try and point out policymakers, typically in the legislature. Sometimes we have I think the former treasurer Nancy Kopp received an award from us once. There's a variety of other players who we bring to a conference, we put in the front of the room, and we sort of say, hey, everybody in county land, this is someone who really had your back. We had a big issue, and she worked hard to make sure we were protected, or he supported all the amendments that we needed and got this bill into perfect shape and helped get it done. I think it's a good part of the legislative cycle we're cards on the table. Like, we're an organization that tries to affect policy and we advocate stuff, but we're not out there helping people get reelected.
Right.
We don't do campaign contributions. We don't have a political action committee. Yeah. So what does MACo and county governments and all of our county commissioners and elected officials back home, what do we bring to the table? To some degree, it's like we can work together toward good outcomes. And I like the idea of, hey, Senator, like, we're not going to help your campaign fund exactly, but we're going to tell a lot of people that you were on the right side of an important issue. And the stuff we care about tends to be things that people back in the district care about. We're talking about education and transportation and your parks and like all that kind of stuff counties do. People love that stuff. They love their library, right?
Right. And these are shared constituents, right? We're representing the same constituents. And I agree, making good policy is really, really important. So let's talk about the award winners. They're on social media. We can share those tweets. But let's start in the Senate, Michael, and let's start with Senator Katie Fry Hester. Senator Hester seems like she has been involved in a lot of the things that we've been working on over the past few years. And one of the big ones is broadband, right? And Maryland became a national leader with a program that, we're doing this Dig Once legislation now. She led that effort. And so we wanted to recognize her for that. But generally, she is always somebody who wants to know what the local governments think before she ever makes a decision on a bill. It's a box that she checks. And I think that's really important for us.
Well, I think especially because the opposite approach is so much easier, right? So, I mean, she's a technology inclined person, and so we've got some real policy challenges. Last year, we were really getting into these issues with broadband. How do you get it deployed and rolled out and so forth? And that's kind of tricky. It's cutting edge stuff, and that's cool and interesting. Not everybody gets it. She does.
Right.
But at the same time, you start saying, let's come up with a Maryland model. The easiest thing to do is you create one stamp and then you cut 24 cookies and say, we're all going to do it exactly this way.
Right.
It takes, you got to roll up your sleeves and work harder if it's going to be, let's scale this appropriately. Let's give some flexibility for places that need something different. And she's received that message and then I think really run with it. So she gets not only like begrudging agreement, but enthusiasm from her partners at the local government level. And that's super.
100%. And she's also been working really hard on cyber, which will be a big issue this session. And so, again, just working collaboratively with local governments, making sure that everybody's at the table. That's what we like to see. The other award in the Senate went to Senator Corey McCray, Michael, and Senator McCray, a friend on the podcast. We went down to Baltimore City and did a podcast with him. That was really cool. One of my favorite experiences. So talk about what Senator McCray has meant to MACo, and he's leading an effort this year to restore critical funding for local roads. But that's not where this began with Senator McCray. He's always been somebody, again, who has worked well with local governments.
Right. So I think that's well put. It's interesting because local governments have such a big portfolio. We're affected by so many different things. We end up sometimes opposing an idea from the same legislator that we're supporting the next day, or vice versa.
All the time.
Right? Yeah. So this does happen. So we have these complicated relationships. If you think of them as personal relationships, they can be complicated because on Tuesday, we love your bill. Thanks so much. This is terrific. And then in a different committee, different topic on Wednesday, it's we're blowing this up. This is the worst thing ever. And then by Thursday, you should be sitting down talking about both of them. And you ought to be past the personal level and into let's find common ground. Right. Let's work together on stuff. I think, once delegate, now Senator McCray is one of those relationships that he recognized that local governments could be a partner in getting stuff done. And that's, I think it's been useful for him. I don't think it's just, a selfless thing.
Sure.
He wants to be effective and he wants to get some of his ideas done. And if we've got a concern about local implementation or cost or rigidity or that sort of stuff, it's in his interest to say, let me hear you out and let me make sure that my idea fits with the way you want to do it. And we can work together on this. And now we're in the same corner on lots of stuff. I like the evolution of that relationship. Sometimes it works that great. Sometimes it doesn't. That's okay. But I think our members were really enthusiastic. We missed our chance to have him at the winter conference to stand up and clap and that sort of thing. But he'll be at one of our conferences before too long talking about his next big idea and talking about how do I get the counties with me rather than, the ones who are knocking on the door saying, I got 17 amendments. So I love it.
Yeah, really, really well put because it is so important. I mean, why take the path of least resistance? You try to get everybody on the same page, and I think he's recognized that. Moving over to the House, Michael, Delegate Jessica Feldmark. This is someone familiar to county government, worked with the Howard County Councils for many years. She became a delegate. And so she understands how county government works, but she's also been instrumental, a lot of work with local income tax flexibility, if you want to talk about that a little bit, also with broadband. So talk a little bit about Jessica Feldmark and the award that she got for legislation and a Legislator of the Year award from MACo.
Right. So she did, she was the House co-sponsor of last year's broadband legislation, which I think is a big deal.
Big deal.
And we had our Southeast regional meeting with our counterparts from like a whole, 14, 15 state region. And, we ended up with an extended conversation about the Maryland bill on broadband and next steps. And we got just a whole slew of other states saying, send us the link to that bill because I want to hear more about it. There's stuff in there that we want to take a look at for Georgia, for Tennessee, for Texas, and so forth. That's great. And it takes legislators who get it. So Senator Hester, yay, Delegate Feldmark as the House champion on there, and she had to do some heavy lifting. This was not like this bill did not come out the way it came in.
Right.
It took some maneuvering to get to a final, as things frequently do.
Yes, that's how you get. It's hard to pass a bill.
So she plugged in, figured it out, was a real asset there. And on tax issues, she sits on the Ways and Means Committee and worked with local governments on a matter. Our income tax is just it's what do they say? There's the old saying like if the only thing you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail.
Right.
It's like the least flexible tax tool that county governments have. Set one rate, that's it. You're done thinking about it.
Unlike the state and the federal government,
almost
right?
Everybody who does income taxes uses brackets and so forth. The idea in this bill didn't seem like it was super controversial. It kind of drifted into controversy, but the core principle was just, let's let the counties set tiers if they want to. And at that level, she was able to get through controversy and difficulty and some pushback and saying there's still a core idea worth saving. She helped us get that bill done. And I don't think we're going to have a revolution in county income taxes, but at least having some tools in the toolbox, I think it's the right direction. So grateful for her remembering the stuff she understands from having worked a long time with county government and now putting some of that to play, in her seat in the legislature. I love it.
Absolutely. Hear, hear. And then finally, the second award in the House, Delegate Jason Buckle, the minority leader in the House, also sits on Ways and Means. And Delegate Buckle, Michael, he's somebody that is always willing to hear MACo out. And if he has a bill, he wants to work on ways to fix it rather than just jamming things through. He always comes to us and says, hey, what can we do? I want to partner with you all. I understand what unfunded mandates are. I understand, what all this means. And particularly when he's representing, Western Maryland, where resources are not necessarily as fruitful as they may be in other parts of the state. He often understands working with MACo is important too, because we do represent all counties and we do want to make sure there's an even playing field for everyone. So I think he appreciates that about MACo, but I know there's a lot of we appreciate about him as well.
Yeah, I think so. We when we've been talking about missing the in-person stuff in Annapolis, a big part of that is the informal work that you could do face-to-face, just in the hallway after a hearing, or you run into somebody on Main Street in Annapolis and you talk for literally 60 seconds, but you might work something out, or you might let somebody know, okay, we get it. Our amendment isn't that important. If you can do this one thing, where stuff gets done in that informal setting. He's a great example of that. I've lost count of the number of times that he's reached out and said, I was worried about this bill originally, but after hearing, Kevin testified in the Ways and Means Committee, and I want to talk to you two because after hearing that, I think if we just took this one piece out of the bill, you guys would probably be okay. That worry about implementation from the counties would probably go away. We might be able to get this done. And I think, the minority party members of the committee would probably be okay with that too. And, anyway, the idea of let's crack a couple eggs and whip together that omelet. He's always like a step deep into that kind of thinking. And it's super helpful to have folks who are not just, I'm behind the desk, you're out there. He's definitely the let's talk this stuff through. So, another dumb little anecdote, but we try and get guest speakers to come to events with our board of directors or to our legislative committee and so forth. And we did the perfunctory invitation to him in his new role as minority leader of the House. Right. We said, well, the MACo board of directors is meeting in the middle of the Eastern Shore. So, probably you'd want to have Chris Adams, who at the time was the minority whip. It's like maybe you'd want to have him come in and represent the party, and you could, pitch some issues that the caucus is working on.
Trying to make it less awkward. Like, we know you don't want to drive all the way down there. Right.
Right. For him to drive all the way to Denton for our meeting is, I'm sure, 5.5, 6 hours round trip.
It's a long way.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And I don't know, he responded in 40 minutes, not in 3 or 4 days, 45 minutes. He comes back, he says, let me know exactly where and when. I'm going to do it if I can, and I'm perfectly willing to haul out and back. And he did exactly that. As nearly as I can tell, he drove out, spent an hour with our folks. He and Delegate Adams spent an hour with our folks. And I think he just basically put his hat back on and drove back up the mountain. So gets it, understands that these connections are useful, and I love the informal reach out, but he's been really good to work with at a lot of levels. So
couldn't agree more. So that was good today to be able to finally give those awards out. When we had our winter conference, they were in special session.
Right. So we missed our big opportunity.
Right.
The fun thing is you put everybody up on the stage, and you have a few hundred county people stand up and clap, and it's supposed to be a moving moment. I don't know that a quick shot for the socials is exactly the same thing, but still, the MACo president joins us and gives a direct thank you. And we mention, these things are important to us. I want that to have some value, some take-home value for the legislators who like respond to stuff that the counties really do care about. It's all in good faith, and when they take it well, I like to run it up the flagpole.
Yeah, really good stuff, and so being over there was good. I'm glad you were able to get over there as well. And so, Michael, we talked a little bit about the Senate and the House, and so. What do you think? I mean, still the most interesting piece of this to me is people who have to testify in the Senate and the House on the same day. We talked about this, the logistics. I mean, I haven't heard any nightmare stories yet, but certainly, I mean, it's going to come to a point where people are just scrambling to find places where they can go and hide and testify from the Senate virtually to the House. That still it's still happening, and still seems like the House is going to remain virtual for the remainder of the session. But haven't seen anything go off the rails yet. But we're just into this. So what do you think?
You haven't had that day yet.
I have not. I have not.
So I guess it's still a TBA for us. I mean, it hasn't been bedlam here in Annapolis this week. So we've had like 3 full days of hearings. And I saw some bills that were scheduled this week where it was the same bill being the cross-filed House and Senate bills.
Right.
They cross-filed the same bill in both chambers to sort of speed up the process. And a standard old-fashioned thing to do was, while the people are in town, we'll do the Senate bill first and we'll do the House bill last. And then all these people just make a big parade from one building to the other. Well, is it being courteous or discourteous to have the same one day for the hearings on both bills in both chambers?
Right.
Eventually, it's going to be a thing where 15 people need to suddenly scurry for a place to get enough privacy to give their 2-minute testimony.
Yes,
right.
Yes, on the same internet network, right? So that's a challenge too, right?
So I mean, maybe that will strain the system, but I think everybody's hopeful. The Senate looks like they doubled down on their capacity within their building, anticipating that this will be a thing. So that's thinking steps ahead, which is the right way to deal with it. So let's hope that this works okay. I know we've got stakeholders out there who are frustrated with the remote engagement and with coming in person and that sort of stuff. So I don't know. We'll see how this untangles. This first week felt like it was the trial balloon, and if anything happens on the fly, like, it wouldn't be a shock if this Friday afternoon something pops up in the internet saying, oh, by the way, for next week, the Senate's going to do things just a little differently, and here's what we're going to do. I wouldn't be a shock.
Wouldn't be a shock.
Yeah.
You could see some refinements there, I agree. But generally, I thought it went well. In-person seems to be going pretty well. They certainly opened up with a bang doing the big climate bill on day one of in-person testimony. So that was like, man, an all-day hearing.
Well, it's like a stress test.
Yeah.
Right? A little like that, right? That's what you're supposed to do with banks and so forth.
Right.
You run the simulation of what's the worst thing that could happen.
Right.
So here's a bill that you literally have 100 people who want to speak. So that was literally your first day of in-person testimony. Okay, bring in the first 18, and then you ask those people, hey, if you're here, but if you're not here on these, if your name hasn't been called, these first 3 panels, please step outside, let those people stay in, and we'll cycle you through. They were like every other seat.
Papers all over the chairs, and
So it's different, but still, like, you got a chance to sit at the stand. I'm sure I'll get there soon. I mean, it's going to feel like old times, being able to look up, and just like that, like sensing body language.
So much.
And when you can tell someone is puzzled by what you're saying,
so much.
You want to change the way you're talking, and in person is just really different.
Yep, so it's great. And I agree with you too. Just, running into people, you can get way more done just by seeing people and not having to text everybody and emails. It just gets old. So that was really good. It felt like old times. You're right. So that's good. Hopefully you'll get there soon. So Michael, one of the biggest news items this week in Annapolis is the Accountability Implementation Board. And I'm going to let you take the lead here and explain what that is and remind everybody what we're talking about. But several different news items related to that. And again, this all goes back to the blueprint into Kerwin, right?
This is our bread and butter.
Can't get away from it. We're never going to get away from it. Never going to get away.
Okay, well, this doesn't really have to go all the way back, but it does trace back to we call it the blueprint for Maryland. It was the Kerwin Commission. It's the state's big broad, ambitious study about how are we going to deliver public education, how are we going to get from here to a much more forward-looking point, a decade or so from now. And one of the tenets in that bill, we've spent a lot of time talking about funding, and that's the county role in all this is dollars, but one piece in that bill that a lot of people, including Britt Kerwin, the chair of the commission, felt was really essential was that if you're going to make these new investments in public education, we need to really bird dog it to make sure that it's happening on the ground the way that we envisioned it in the report and in the paper and in the bill and in the fund.
And that makes sense, right? This is there are a lot of heavy, weighty recommendations with a lot of money involved, and so it would make sense. You're not just going to fold up your tent and go away and let happen what happens.
Write a bunch of checks, and then we'll come back in a decade with a new commission. Right. This they meant to be like, we want to see the follow through. We want the receipts, right? And so and it makes sense at a lot of levels, but the legislation talks about investments and changes in structures down to the individual school level, which has not really been Maryland's bag up until now. But hey, this school is separate. We need specific services here. You've got to hire a person to do these functions. You've got to deliver these new things, and then we got to respond to these kids in a new way. So having a body to oversee that process, basically a new board with professional staff, is the way to make sure that as this goes along, we've got someone who's watching, who's sort of minding the store, making sure this is going the way you want it to, but this area they're having trouble hiring the people we wanted, and we're falling behind, so we might need to refine things A, B, and C. That's the kind of thing that you'd want this board to be doing. So it's implementation, right? So then like that's different,
right? But so like I think so like even I have to go back and rack my brain and remember all of this stuff. But I think a lot of people think, okay, so this implementation board, this is the board now, Michael, that Kerwin, they laid out the roadmap, and now this is the board who's going to like change the wealth formulas and decide like who gets paid what, or that is that what we're talking about here? But
we keep hearing that, and it's just a misunderstanding.
Okay.
So this isn't the body that's really reframing the policy that's already been set.
The
formulas have been written, and that wealth formula that we've talked multiple times about, that's set, that's in law, and that's not really up for debate. It's more about, in this 10-year plan, we thought that year 3 was the right time to kick in this new advancement ladder for teaching professionals and to get them onto an accelerated track for higher credentials and potentially higher pay.
Right.
Is year 3 really the right time? Let's find out after year 2. Somebody's like taking a temperature and saying, okay, we're on track to do that the way we envisioned, but this other part of the program, we might not be able to meet those targets, and here's why, or we need to do something differently. That's the kind of stuff they're supposed to be doing. I think audit is not the right word, but it's, I don't know. I think they're the ones who are supposed to be real-time monitoring and measuring that this stuff is happening the way the policymakers envisioned it.
Accountability, right? That's what we're talking about. They're just trying to make sure everything's going as envisioned. So let's go back, Michael, to the fall, and this I think traces back to that a bit. And that's when there was a lot of conversation about appointing this board and how that was going to work, and remind us what happened there, because that all plays into what is going on this week, right?
So all this stuff is in the news this week, but allow us one more lily pad on the way there. Back in the fall, it was time for the board to be populated. Let's get the people nominated and appointed to the board.
Right.
The process for that was written into statute. It was part of the bill to say there's going to be a nominating committee. Here's who appoints the people on the nominating committee. They'll hear applicants, and they'll nominate a slate of recommended people to the governor. The governor then picks the final membership from that slate.
Right.
And what we saw during that process was the recommended slate from the nominating committee. If you looked on a map of Maryland where those people reside, it was just like huddled around the center of the state.
Right.
And a lot of people who lived in other parts of the state said, wait, this doesn't seem right. There's nobody anywhere near where I live. There's no one from Western Maryland, the Eastern Shore, Southern Maryland. It was literally, I've forgotten the array, but it was, multiple Montgomery County, Baltimore City, I think one who lives in Anne Arundel County, one from Baltimore County, and like that's the list. Right.
So you can understand why people would be like, hold on a second.
Right.
Yeah, this is a statewide, big blueprint. We're investing a lot. We want to be accountable everywhere. So we want to make sure we have that geographical representation.
Right. And in addition to there's nobody from Western Maryland, there's also the sort of subsidiary policy. There's no one here who is in a jurisdiction with the kind of issues that face a smaller school district.
Right.
Like if you're like Anne Arundel County on up, your school system has literally dozens of schools, and the way you hire is in waves and by the score, where if you're Allegheny County, you have 2 high schools or what, it's a totally
different scale.
Framing. Right, exactly. So anyway, that question of what is this board really about kind of poked its head up a little bit. Some people were thinking, well, we're going to be cut out of the decisions of who gets the funding or how do we distribute money to A versus B and that sort of thing. That's not really what the body is for. But still, I think it's a reasonable argument that, boy, I'd rather see a wider map I'd rather see more pins in that map. So that was a dust up at the time. The governor sort of, I don't know, maybe like held his nose and said, the law says I have to pick 7 from these 9. I wish I had a bigger map of people to choose from, but I don't. Right. So be it. Here's my 7. So that catapults to the approval process. A lot of nominations from the governor need to go before the Maryland Senate. Right?
And so that goes fast forward to now, and that was the sort of the beginning of this week. It was a dust up on the floor. There were nominees presented on the Senate floor, and they got held up a bit, and there were a lot of questions. Ultimately, Michael, a lot of the stuff you just talked about with the geographic diversity and whatnot, they all got through, right? So now that's over. And then the next big piece of this was, there's also a bill that would mandate that there is more geographic diversity, right? And so MACo supporting that bill, I think it's the right thing to do. We want everybody to be represented. And again, we're not talking about changing formulas and who gets to decide what they're spending, how much money. Right. This is just about making sure that everything's accountable statewide. So those appointments got through, but now there's a bill to maybe add some representation from other parts of the state.
Right. And I have forgotten exactly how the bill is written. As I recall it, it looks at regions of the state and then some of the, like a certain number of the largest, most populous counties. Right. Basically says, you check all these boxes as you go through it. I don't know what might make its way all the way through the legislature, but I think it passes a smell test to say, hey, let's revisit this. A body of 7, like you're not gonna ruin its efficiency by expanding it to 9 or 11 members or something like that. So some idea of let's have some extra representation and bring in other parts of the state geographically. I wouldn't be surprised if that makes it through in one form or another. I think that's reasonable, and they've got timeline issues now too. This body just made the chair, who's former Montgomery County executive and former MACo president Ike Leggett, awfully well respected figure and someone who's done a lot of time in public service. For the county, for the state, and for his country, right? Is now the chair of this body, and he was confirmed as the chair. He just did a pretty extended briefing to the House of Delegates leadership on education issues today. Part of what he was talking about was timetables, because they're already like right up against deadlines. They're just not going to make. Right. Some of this traces back to the veto of the original bill, where funding didn't have to happen and so forth. It's gotten a little tricky.
Sure. But he was joined by Rachel Heiss, and Rachel Heiss was, nobody knows more about Kerwin, those bills, the blueprint, than Rachel Heiss. So it makes a lot of sense that she's now there supporting that board. And so you're right. They did a big presentation. They came out with sort of a new timetable today, right? Because you mentioned there are some delays and they're kind of up against it. But Michael, it sounds like that is going to require a bill, right? And so we've talked about, is there a chance that we delve into a Kerwin 3.0 this session? So in your mind, if we have to do new timetables, is that does that open the window enough, right? And we, we're watching the Olympics. Is that a bobsled everybody can jump on?
Everybody just jump in.
Or a skeleton, they want to go face first and just go? Like, is that enough, you think, like a bill like that just changes some timetables, is that enough to open up the window and say, let's throw all this other stuff at the wall too and see what sticks?
Well, I think I'm still stuck at I don't know. That's probably poor orchestration of a podcast to set up a question and with a dud answer like that. I really, it doesn't feel to me like there's the big broad list of concerns like last year. Like last year, you had a head count for students that was almost everybody agreed was not a fair representation of your real student body.
Right.
Because of the veto, you had a long list of timetables that had to be changed and funding references that had to be changed. So like the list of things that you, for all intents and purposes, you really had to do during the 21 session was going to be like a 5, 8, 10 page bill anyway.
Right. Couldn't avoid it.
So the idea of here's the bill, it's got all these technical corrections and some policy refinements and like all this stuff. And fine, like we'll call it Kerwin 2.0 to try and explain to everybody this is the meaningful, let's finalize, let's tie up all these loose ends, right?
Right.
This year, I mean, what do you have? You've got this one particular board that needs a new timetable, but that's literally like 4 or 5 references in the law. That could be done in a page or two.
Or you could do it through the bill we talked about earlier, right? If you're going to expand,
you've got membership of that body. If the will of the General Assembly is to change the timetable, then it would certainly stand the single subject test in Maryland that you change its due dates as well as its membership. So that could be in one bill, but again, it doesn't have to be a behemoth.
Right. It doesn't need to be an omnibus bill, right?
And there's another bill now in both chambers that's looking in sort of a technical way at the county requirement, looking at last year's count might be a bit of a hiccup.
Right. So maintenance of efforts.
But I think all of this feels smaller scale. So if last year felt like the earthquake, then what we've got are like a few little aftershocks. And maybe you don't need to have a 4-alarm response to this one. Maybe it can be 1 or 2 bills, just pass them. It doesn't need to be the big toboggan effect where suddenly we take up every question again.
Yeah, and I think you would think that if that were going to be the case, I mean, we're at a point in session now where you would have had a lot of that ready to go and maybe a bill would have been dropped. It doesn't have to. They can certainly do bills whenever they want to do them. But, I sort of agree with you. I don't think it's enough now where it opens up the door for a lot of other things. It seems like this is pretty innocuous and mostly technical with the date changes and whatnot. Maybe that we'll expand the board, get some more diversity there. The maintenance of effort, if you want to come talk to Michael and get into the weeds about that, we're not going to even do that on the podcast. We'll put him outside.
That could be for the Patreon version of the podcast. For the people who want the serious punishment, I'll walk through the whole thing.
We'll put him outside on Conduit Street, and you can come find him at you just grab him because we can't even do that here.
Back and forth.
Yes, we're just shaking his hand with papers and no.
I honestly, all right. I think just talking this out here, I think I'm probably talked into. No, they don't need a giant Kerwin. I don't think you need a big 3.0 bill. I think whether the reference dates get changed in a little bill here or there, or whether it's in the membership bill, or even in the other maintenance of effort bill, you only have a couple things to do. You could do the easy low-hanging fruit without this being breakout, every single stakeholder and take up all those issues again. So I'm sold. Small ball here.
And they got enough going on. I mean, it's not like
it's not like they're begging for things to take care of during an election year. With the extra twist of filing deadlines moved back a month, so uncertainty about who you might be running against is still lingering out there like that. Don't underestimate that as a factor in this session.
Big time.
It's going to be till almost the end of the session before a lot of members know who's running against them, or whether they are going to have a tough race in their own primary, or suddenly there'll be people who just announce the day before the filing deadline, I'm going to retire, I'm not doing this anymore. That happens every go-round, but with 6 weeks to go in session rather than 2 is a different story.
Yeah, this just prolongs the anxiety that you can feel around town for a lot of people. So
no shortage of things for legislature, its leaders, and its rank and file members to be thinking about. They don't need a big bruiser bill this year. So keep this small. I like it.
Okay. Anything else, Michael? We'll wrap it up. But do you have anything else on your mind before before we retire for this episode?
I'm just glad to be back here on Conduit Street recording live. It's good to see you. Good to get a chance to walk around in the halls a little bit today. And I don't know, my experience is like Annapolis is drifting a little more toward normal, and that could be on balance a good thing. If people are feeling safe and the health indicators suggest that this is a reasonable, responsible thing to do, I think I'm here for it.
Okay. Yeah, me too. And it does feel good to be back with you as well, and with all of our colleagues here at MACo. So things seem like they're returning to normal, and we hope that trend continues. But we will leave it there for today. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, please go ahead and subscribe. That way, all these episodes will be sent directly to the device of your choice. You can also follow along on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and then, of course, the Conduit Street blog. But for now, for Michael Sanderson, this is Kevin Kinnally signing off, and we will talk to you soon.